Success isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of consequences. In a world where progress stalled, they built a new future, the Longevity Principality, ensuring civilization endures. Not just survival, not just progress. A civilization that outperforms the world.
The Longevity Principality. The rise and recursive consolidation of the REDEEMR Consortium. July 31st, 2026. Introduction. Every civilization reveals itself through the institutions it chooses to preserve. Some preserve dynasties. Some preserve wealth. Some preserve borders. Some preserve myths about themselves. The Longevity Principality begins with a different proposition. It asks what happens when a civilization decides that its primary resource is neither territory, nor capital, nor labor, nor information, but healthy time itself. Not immortality. Not the denial of death. Not the fantasy of escaping biology. Healthy time. Years lived with capability. Years lived with purpose. Years lived in possession of one's own faculties. This is the resource around which every institution in the Principality ultimately organizes itself. That single decision changes everything. Pipe Dream described how such a civilization could first be built. It described the engineering, the habitats, the pressure architecture, the ecological systems, the constitutional foundations, the economic mechanisms that transformed a visionary settlement into a viable sovereign society. That book asked a single question. Can such a civilization exist? This book asks a far more difficult one. What happens after it succeeds? Success is never the end of history. It is the beginning of consequences. The Longevity Principality is not the history of a city. It is the history of accumulated competence. Civilizations do not become extraordinary because one generation possesses extraordinary intelligence. They become extraordinary because every generation inherits institutions that remember. Knowledge becomes protocol. Protocol becomes infrastructure. Infrastructure becomes governance. Governance becomes habit. Habit becomes civilization. Each generation solves problems its predecessors could scarcely imagine, only to leave behind capabilities its successors begin taking for granted. The result is not progress in a straight line. It is recursive consolidation. Every solved problem becomes a platform from which more ambitious problems become solvable. The REDEEMR Consortium occupies a unique place within that process. It is not the government of the Principality. Nor is it merely a corporation, a charity, a sovereign wealth fund, a humanitarian organization, an insurer, a procurement network, or a technological consortium. It is all of these simultaneously. REDEEMR exists because no single institution proved capable of coordinating problems whose solutions inevitably crossed legal jurisdictions, scientific disciplines, political systems, commercial markets, ecological boundaries, and humanitarian obligations. What began decades earlier as a collection of interoperable enterprises gradually became civilization's principal coordination engine. Its procurement systems became logistical infrastructure. Its humanitarian deployments became diplomatic channels. Its insurance mechanisms became engines of preventative governance. Its continuity programs became constitutional memory. Its commercial ventures financed public works. Its forensic capabilities strengthened institutional accountability. Its research commons accelerated scientific discovery. Its emergency operations matured into planetary crisis management. Its thousands of seemingly unrelated activities slowly ceased to be unrelated. No master plan designed this outcome. Competence accumulated until coordination itself became the consortium's greatest product. The Longevity Principality, therefore, tells the story of a civilization whose greatest technological achievement is not any single invention. Its greatest invention is institutional continuity. The civilization becomes progressively more capable because it repeatedly refuses to discard successful institutions once their original purpose has been fulfilled. Instead, it generalizes them. The emergency system becomes public infrastructure. The research project becomes permanent science. The procurement network becomes economic architecture. The medical protocol becomes constitutional doctrine. The habitat becomes a municipality. The municipality becomes a sovereign polity. The sovereign polity becomes a civilization. None of these transformations occur because someone predicted them. Each emerges because existing institutions continually discover new uses for themselves. This is why this volume concerns itself far less with inventions than with second and third order effects. The first order effect of a therapeutic habitat is healthier residents. The second order effect is the emergence of new economic, legal, scientific, and political institutions organized around health itself. The third order effect is that these institutions begin solving problems far beyond the therapeutic habitat that originally justified their existence. Capabilities spread. Responsibilities multiply. Influence follows. Eventually, the civilization discovers that its greatest export is not technology. It is competence. Competence, however, is never politically neutral. Every capability alters the balance between those who possess it and those who do not. The principality's success attracts admiration. It also attracts dependence, investment, imitation, suspicion, sabotage, hostility. Governments question its legitimacy. Corporations resent its independence. Legacy institutions fear replacement. Ideological movements denounce its methods. Criminal enterprises attempt infiltration. Disinformation campaigns seek to erode public trust. Acts of sabotage test systems that had previously been evaluated only under laboratory conditions. The principality discovers that resilience is not measured by how well institutions function in peace. Resilience is measured by how gracefully they survive deliberate attempts to make them fail. Consequently, this is also the story of a civilization learning that success creates adversaries as reliably as it creates allies. The Synodi formation remains its geographical foundation. Yet by the closing chapters of this volume, the reader will understand that the formation is no longer the civilization's defining feature. The defining feature is the network of institutions that now extends far beyond it. The therapeutic environment remains indispensable. But the civilization no longer depends solely upon geography. It depends upon memory, coordination, trust, governance, scientific integrity, operational discipline, and the willingness of successive generations to preserve institutions whose importance they may no longer fully understand. Nothing in this book is presented as destiny. History contains no inevitable outcomes. Every institution described here could fail. Every constitutional principle could be corrupted. Every technology could be abused. Every success could become complacency. The future remains contingent upon countless decisions made by imperfect people confronting circumstances they cannot entirely foresee. Yet history also teaches another lesson. Civilizations that patiently accumulate competence eventually acquire options unavailable to everyone else. Those options do not guarantee wisdom. They merely enlarge the space within which wisdom, or folly, may operate. The longevity principality is therefore neither utopia nor dystopia. It is an archive. A constitutional archive. An economic archive. An institutional archive. A scientific archive. A geopolitical archive. It documents approximately the first 2 centuries of a civilization that has learned to preserve not merely lives, but capabilities, not merely capabilities, but institutions, not merely institutions, but the accumulated memory through which civilization itself becomes increasingly difficult to erase. This volume is not the story of humanity's greatest engineering project. That story has not yet begun. This is the history that makes such projects conceivable. Not because anyone planned them, but because generations of patient institution building quietly transformed an ambitious underwater habitat into one of the most capable civilizations humanity had ever assembled. The formation made survival possible. The Consortium made continuity possible. The Principality made continuity sovereign. Everything that follows begins there. That wasn't intentional. It looks like the generation stalled. Let's pick up where we should have been. Notice what we are already doing differently from the earlier outline. The book isn't saying, here's 12 chapters about REDEEMR. Instead, every chapter answers a civilizational question. Why does a consortium exist at all? Why isn't it simply nationalized? Why does redemption become an economic instrument? Why does operational patronage matter? Why are redeemed assets politically acceptable? Why doesn't this collapse into oligarchy? These aren't technology chapters. They're institutional history. Hear longevity principality. The rise and recursive consolidation of the REDEEMR Consortium. Expanded table of contents. Part 1. The second founding. When Pipe Dream became a state. This opening part doesn't repeat Pipe Dream. It shows the moment when an ambitious habitat discovers it has become something the world can no longer classify. Chapter 1. The last day of the prototype. Pipe Dream quietly ceases to be an experiment. Chapter 2. Recognition without permission. The world discovers that sovereignty sometimes emerges before recognition. Chapter 3. The cost of existing. The first realization that survival is no longer enough. Permanence demands institutions. Chapter 4. From settlement to civilization. Residency becomes citizenship. Citizenship becomes obligation. Chapter 5. The constitutional moment. The first charter is drafted not to create the principality, but to restrain it. Chapter 6. The consortium behind the curtain. REDEEMR enters history openly, not as government, but as the consortium whose accumulated enterprises made the impossible financially, technically, and institutionally feasible. Chapter 7. Markets, missions, and mandates. The difference between a corporation, a consortium, and a civilization. Chapter 8. Healthy time as statecraft. Healthspan becomes a constitutional resource rather than a commercial product. Chapter 9. The first foreign questions. Neighboring governments begin asking whether Pipe Dream is still merely a development. Chapter 10. The burden of competence. Success becomes impossible to hide. Chapter 11. Why the world starts watching. Academic institutions, insurers, investors, regulators, journalists, and intelligence agencies all arrive for different reasons. Chapter 12. The geography of responsibility. Owning territory is easier than becoming responsible for it. End of Part 1. The world no longer treats Pipe Dream as an ambitious development. It has become the longevity principality. Nothing afterwards can return to anonymity. Part 2. The consortium that made it possible. REDEEMR finds its place. This is not a book about REDEEMR.
Not just survival, not just progress. A civilization that outperforms the world.
What the longevity principality exported first wasn't food, nor medicine, not governance software, or even its philosophical doctrine. It exported its longitudinal data set.
We entered quietly.
Initiate the final protocol.
Stone sky, where ancient water remembered what history forgot. Not seeking kingdoms, not seeking conquest, only a place where tomorrow could breathe.
The Longevity Principality. The rise of the recursive consolidation of the REDEEMR Consortium.
The Longevity Principality. A civilization built on healthy time, institutions, and responsibility.
For the Longevity Principality, success isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of consequences.
We entered quietly beneath the limestone sky, where ancient water remembered what history forgot.
Pirate First's Pipe Dream, The Cenote Chronicles, begins.
Part 0. Entering the formation.
Data set.
You want the code, you want the light, you face the Empress in the cyber night.